Welcome to the Rex Andrews Show. I'm glad to have you back today if you're a continuous and recurring listener. And if you found us for the first time today, welcome. We're glad to have you. It's my job to keep you here. So we've got some great things that we always talk about. Rants, funny stories, a little bit of cowboy poetry, interviews, and some humor. So today I've got a really exciting guest. And before we get there, a couple of the house clean normal things. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're syndicated on 23 different platforms. So wherever your podcast audience is, that's where we are, we hope. You can also find us on social media. So subscribe so you always are on the same page for the next update. And then lastly, I want to reach out to our sponsor, our good friends over at Wealth Management Group. They're here in Colorado, but they serve nationwide. The thing I love about them as financial planners and advisors, they don't sell products. They sit down with you, they help you understand what your goals are, and then they find the right vehicles to get you there. Great people, not pushy, don't sell things, great to work with. That's Wealth Management Group at wealthmanagementestate.com. Excuse me. Boy, I can't even talk this morning. It's really early. Wealthmanagement.estate. That's wealthmanagement.estate. All right, so let's get to it. Fun stuff. I have an exciting guest today. I've got Bob Beauprez, who is, if you've been in Colorado like I have, a native, you certainly know of Bob. But for a lot of people who are new to Colorado, they may not know so much. And Bob has some really interesting perspectives and insights, and he has a great business we want to talk about today that I'm going to guarantee you 99.9% of you know very little about. So with no further ado, good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Rex. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great. You know, I was thinking about this morning. I was prepping. This is almost like one of my favorite memories. My grandfather had a ranch out in the Sandhills, Nebraska, Valentine, Nebraska. And he and I were always early risers. And he would sit in his living room that faced the valley by his ranch. And he would sit in his little recliner. And I would go up there and it would be pre-sunrise, just like this morning. Pre-sunrise, and we would sit and have a conversation as he listened to the radio, listened to the cattle prices in the market and what was going on in the morning, and a little bit of Paul Harvey, that kind of stuff. So treasured memories. So no, we don't have any Paul Harvey today, and you're not my grandpa, but I'll tell you what, we are pre-dawn and pre-sunrise, and we're going to have some fun conversation today. All right. So, Bob, you grew up here in Colorado. Where did you grow up? What year were you born? Help the folks in the audience get a little bit of background about Bob.
I was born in 1948. Actually born on a ranch just on the south side of present-day Louisville, part of the town of Superior, right along US 36, just outside of Boulder. But shortly after I was born, 4 months after to be exact, my folks moved to what they always called the home place, where my dad was born and grew up, which is just on the west side of Lafayette, actually incorporated into Lafayette now.
Okay.
As we've developed the property. I was never a kid that enjoyed being on the farm. I mean, we worked. I did all the stuff that was necessary. We started out with beef cattle, and then by the time I was a little bitty guy, in 1952, my dad also bought some milk cows so he could get up earlier and stay up later and cows milk too. That was all part of trying to survive through some drought years. I found out a long time later is why he got into the dairy business, but dairy is pretty much what I knew. We also farmed a lot to raise feed for those dairy cows. We owned 160, but we farmed about 1,200 acres of rented ground around us, all irrigated ground, and virtually all of it irrigated, and grew alfalfa and barley and corn. And feedstock for the animals. I went to school here locally, of course, and then eventually to CU, and got a degree in education. Wanted to follow my oldest brother's steps and be a coach, teach the world how to play better football.
Now I understand you played football at Fairview.
I did.
Fantastic. What position did you play?
Well, I was an offensive tackle. Me and my brothers were all linemen.
Oh, okay.
How about you?
Well, I was a linebacker, a very poor guard, and a decent place kicker. So that's what I went to college to play as a place kicker. I always told people I was too slow and couldn't jump high enough to play those other positions. So let me kick a football. So I went up to UNC for a little bit of football.
Oh, I almost went to UNC. Yeah, but I had a good friend who he played a little football too, and he told me, he said, other than being slow and weak, I had everything necessary.
That's right. That's right. Well, the thing I liked about being a place kicker is, everybody would give you gruff, but at the same time, hey, the girls were just as interested as me as they were the quarterbacks or the linebackers. So I played that card as much as I could. So
yeah, the letter jacket always worked. Huh?
That's right. That's right. Big man on campus, even though it wasn't a very big campus. So anyway.
By the time I got through CU and was about ready to graduate, instead of wanting to get away from that family farm as fast as I could, that family farm started looking pretty neat. I asked my parents two things. Christmas of 1969, I had one semester left before I graduated. And the two things were, one, if they'd have me, I'd like to come back home after graduation and see if maybe it was the dairy business after all.
Okay.
That I would like, and which came as a big shock to them, I think. Again, I was the member of the family that obviously wasn't real endeared to that farm initially.
Now, how many kids were in your family?
I had two brothers and a sister. So four.
Okay, great. And where'd you fit in that pecking order?
I was third.
Third, okay.
I am third. The other question I had for my parents, or not really a question, I guess a revelation, and it wasn't all that surprising to them. Claudia and I, my wife, and I had been dating for over 4 years at that point. I told them I was going to ask her to marry me over the Christmas break, and would like to bring her home to that farm the following May, which we did. Dad not only gave me a job, but me and my second brother, he made us partners in the business. And I pretty much took over running the dairy herd, although we all shared, you know how it is on a farm, you do what you got to do.
Oh, yeah.
They looked after the crops primarily. I looked after the cattle primarily, and did that for the next 20 years. We ended up converting the herd, or I ended up converting the herd to purebreds, registered Holstein cows, exported them, embryos, bull semen. And this was especially embryo transplant was an infant industry then. We were one of the first in the country to really adopt it on any kind of scale. And we sold embryos all over the world. Australia was the only continent that we didn't have our animals on by the time we sold in 1990. Like a lot of front range farms, we were approached by the local town of Lafayette. They needed to expand, and our property and a neighbor that we farmed for, an absentee landowner, was an attractive piece of ground for them. We ended up annexing, selling the dairy cows. I had been on the board of a local bank prior to that for about a dozen years. And that same year as we were selling our cows, they were going to sell the bank.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, there goes the hometown bank. And I didn't like that idea. Hometown community banks were critical, especially to the small business people in towns. And so I'm trying to figure out, what do I do after the cows are gone? My wife and I somewhat impulsively found ourselves buying controlling interest, actually, into a very small, very sick little bank in Lafayette. It should have been closed, and it just hadn't got around to doing it. They needed somebody to run it. I decided to teach myself how to be a banker.
Oh, wow. And, so not only was dairy farming a little self-taught, but banking, huh?
Very much so, but that was kind of the way it was in our family. My granddad came here. He had never been a farmer when he immigrated from Belgium, and taught himself how to be a farmer. Back then in Lafayette, Louisville, where we were, where he was at the time, I wasn't born, obviously. This is 1907. you either went underground and worked in the coal mine, or you were a farmer above the ground. And I'm kind of glad he went above ground. Bought the original farm ground on a handshake with a loan from a neighbor.
Mm.
And thank God the neighbor said yes, or I wouldn't be here talking to you this morning.
You know, a lot of people in Colorado don't realize that there were even there in the Louisville and Lafayette area, there were coal mines that you went underground. Yeah.
Oh my, yes. But both of those towns are essentially all mining area, all tunneled underneath.
Yeah.
Our place was not one of them, our farm, but they were very nearby. I mean, a half a mile away, we used to go get the red ash, the tailings from the coal mine.
Right.
So anyway, I started running this little bank and doing the real estate development at the same time. When we annexed, our neighbor annexed, it ended up combined 700 acres, and both families asked me to look after it. So I looked after that, and that was almost a 3-decade job by the time we got done with it. 1,500 homes and a 18-hole golf course, municipal golf course. So that was quite a project, and I was trying to run the bank at the same time. We had a good run. I mean, you were around in the 90s. The 90s were good to a lot of people, and certainly I was one of them. The little bank went from one struggling branch to 13 in about a dozen years, and from barely 4 million in assets, which really isn't enough to keep the doors open.
Right.
We were about 450 million when we finally sold the bank in 2007. My wife ended up, after I went to Congress in 2002, and as I think you know, and when I went to Congress, I kind of had to leave everything else behind. So I resigned from the bank and from the board. And my wife, she was already on the board, but she took over as chairman of the board of the bank and just did a fantastic job. And by 2007, my last year in Congress, she had decided that we were overbanked, which we were, and that the regulators were getting a little excessive, I might say.
Uh-huh.
This is before the big crash.
Right.
And she decided it was a good time to test the market, and thank God she did. She got the bank sold before the crash, and then we went right back to our roots. A few years later, after I ran for governor, got the second place trophy in that one. You don't get an office in the Capitol for being second place. So.
No, there's no participation trophies handed out for that.
No. That's one of the brutal truths about that business. Anyway, we went back to our roots, something we'd hoped to do at some point in our life. And since we had an opportunity to do something else, we bought a ranch and put buffalo on it. And our second son, he was kind of my right hand when we still had the dairy cows. He was in between things and said, "What are you going to do with that ranch?" I told him, and he said, "You're going to need help. Can I do it?" So just like I was blessed to work alongside my dad for all those years, now I'm blessed to have one of my sons working alongside me. And I'm just one of the luckiest guys, most blessed guys, I think, that's imaginable. I mean, I tell people humbly, but as an example that it's still alive and well, I have lived the American dream. And I'm very, very grateful that I was born American, born into the family I was born into. I've been blessed with all the opportunities that God's put in front of me.
Well, now, wait a minute, Bob, I've got to stop you here. You mentioned the word luck. And of course, there is always luck in life, timing and those things. But I tend to think, and I've said this a lot, and I didn't get it from anywhere else, luck is at the corner of perspiration and persistence. I don't think that luck just happens. I think people make their own luck. So growing up as you did, were there some attributes, because you've been very successful, you've gone through very different things from, raising Holsteins to banking to development to, what have you here with the public office. What do you think has been your key underlying thing that's allowed you to do that?
Well, I'll have to give credit to my parents, especially my dad. They were Depression era kids. part of that greatest generation.
Mhm.
And I thought about it years later. Dad got to 8th grade and quit school and came home and worked on his family farm. My mom was the lucky one. She got to 9th. She grew up nearby, just on the east side of Boulder. Her dad had a farm as well.
Wow, she's a scholar. She made it to ninth grade, huh?
All the way to 9th grade, exactly. And that, wasn't all that unusual that era.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Especially in farm families. But in all the years that I worked alongside my dad, one thing I finally came to realize is that if he wanted to do something, and build a new barn, plant a different crop, do a different management technique of our dairy or the crop farming, change the irrigation system, especially build things. And he built a lot of things, a lot of buildings, built our milk parlor where we milk. He just did it himself. I never heard him say, Rex, that, I can't, or that, I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough schooling. I'm not prepared. He never, if he wanted to get it done, he just went and did it.
Yeah.
And not only did he have that kind of initiative, but a work ethic. I mean, his dad too, when he bought this farm originally, the business, especially out in the West, you go through some dry years, and regardless of how hard you work, sometimes you can't pay the bills. And my dad faced those a couple of different times. I didn't know it growing up as a kid because he and Mom kept it pretty quiet.
Right.
They came close to losing everything 2 different times, once in the 50s, once in the 70s during some drought years. Dad started milking, as I mentioned earlier, in 1952, really to pay the bills, just to have a little bit more revenue. He never missed a morning or evening, Rex, of milking those cows. Even though I had 2 older brothers, even though I was pretty much grown, he never missed a milking from 1952 until I was a senior in high school in 1966.
Wow.
Just get out of bed every morning.
Yep.
Go do it, and then fall in bed at night totally exhausted, and get up the next morning and go do it again. That kind of work ethic. And I never heard, same way, I never heard him complain, I wish I could sleep in. It's our anniversary. It's Christmas. I don't feel well. Never heard any of that. Wish I could take a vacation. Never came up. He he understood and taught me, Rex, that we talk a lot of, I know you're conservative. I'm a conservative. We talk a lot about personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, did he have that in spades. And not only did he display it, he was grateful for the opportunity to work hard and have a little something left when he was done, and to pass it on better to us kids, which he did. Passed it on a whole lot better to all 4 of us than he ever had it himself.
I think it's, for most of the people in the United States now, we've switched from an agrarian country to a metropolitan country. The vast majority of the people live in metropolitan areas. When you roll down to your favorite grocery store and pick up a jug of milk, you're not thinking the fact that on the other end of that, there was a farmer who 7 days a week, twice a day, was out there milking. My grandparents didn't run that many milk cows, but it was enough that we had a milk parlor, of course, with the step down trench and everything. Yeah. We could probably milk 20, 25 at a time, I think. So it wasn't anything near size what you probably were doing, but boy, it was 7 days a week. And I can remember specifically sneaking a sip out of the buckets after they were waiting for the siphons to get on and stuff. So people just don't know that. They don't even realize that it takes 7 days a week to get you that gallon of milk.
Yeah, I know it keeps you close to home. And I mean, that's something it's just a way of life, and you get used to it, but it's extremely demanding. I never got out of the state of Colorado until I was almost out of high school. Mm-hmm. I was going to Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is
wow,
hardly out of state, so barely across the line, because you always had to be back yeah, to do the next meal.
Yeah. I think that's one thing, and I'm not taking away from the current generations. There's a lot of things that they do that are really interesting, but when you learn to work like that, then when you're doing things that are not physical, it just makes it so much easier because you're like, wow, my alternative, I could be out milking cows this morning, or mowing hay, or lifting hay bales, or mucking stalls, or whatever. There's so many things to do. Well, I tell you, when I sit at my desk and I work on websites and I'm pushing internet traffic, whew, that's a lot easier than working so hard that you fall asleep while you're eating dinner.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Speaking of, Dad taught me 3 real big lessons. I already mentioned the work ethic. He and my mom had 64 years together when he finally passed away. And
wow, congratulations.
I never wondered once where he was spending the night or if he loved my mother.
Yeah.
A tremendous example of a good husband. And likewise, at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, I don't care how deep the snow was or how late we were with chores, we were sitting in the third pew on the left of the same old Catholic church in Louisville that he was baptized in and buried from.
Wow.
He often fell asleep because, as you said, you sit down and pretty soon your eyes go closed. He had earned the right to nap a little. He often fell asleep during the homily, but he was there, and he was given back to God that he thought had blessed him some abundance.
Funny when you mention that. My grandparents were pretty much cornerstones of the Catholic Church there in Valentine, and we would go to Mass, and there'd always be a certain set of guys that were sleeping. And I'd ask my grandpa, what's wrong with these guys? Why are these guys sleeping? He said, because it's the only time during the week they get to sit down. And It was true. And you'd see these guys with the straw hat, sun tan line, their foreheads are white, and, that kind of stay faces all, sun tan. They'd be just fast asleep, sitting there listening to the sermon that day because it's the only time they got a chance to sit down.
I lived that life, and I'm living it again. And I love it. I really love getting back to the lane.
So let's fast forward a little bit here. I appreciate that because I'd like people to hear this because, I get on that soapbox all the time. You guys don't know how to work, and this isn't hard, and yeah. And my kids look at me like I'm from another planet. My grandparents sold the ranch, and they were really small kids when my kids got a few opportunities to go up there, so they had no experience with it. But I think the thing that we just have lost touch with that work ethic, and it scares me because the current world we have with so much chaos. These great times can't last forever. I mean, I'm not a doomsdayer, but boy, there's some really opportunities for us to struggle because a lot of people, if things get tough, I'm not sure everybody knows how to get through that. So,
well, I wonder the same thing. I thought growing up, I guess like a lot of kids that you've always got it tougher than everybody else, right?
Yeah.
And I often looked around. I went to Fairview High School and then on to CU. And there weren't very many kids that were working on the family farm.
No.
Even then, now it's, as you just mentioned, it's almost vanished.
Yeah.
But I thought, spring break, that was the time that we always had to clean out the manure and spread it on the field and get the spring planting done. And
yeah,
I'm working my off, and my classmates they're going to Mexico with their family, or they're taking their vacation here, vacation there. I thought, why me? Why did I draw the short straw? And then, as I mentioned, a few years later, when I thought I was going to get away from the farm and go do something else, suddenly that farm life started looking a little bit better. I finally came to my senses, and then realized that growing up and being taught those lessons, that personal responsibility again, showing up on time, getting your work done, and getting it done well. On a family farm, you don't do it. Nobody else is going to do it.
No.
So you learn those lessons, and I think they are lessons that serve us well in life. For most of our country, most of Western civilization, it was that way. People were largely self-sufficient.
Yep.
Whether they were a blacksmith or they had a carpentry shop, or maybe they sold some goods in town, had their little store. They had their own way of sustaining their own life. We've got a mentality now with all this abundance, especially in the United States of America. Thank God we've got it. But there's a whole lot of people that think because I exist, I deserve.
Ugh.
It's somebody, or often that somebody is the government, that they think owes them something just because they're alive and we're blessed to be an American. My dad never was that way. My grandfather wasn't that way, certainly being an immigrant. They really exemplified, and I didn't fully understand it when I was earlier. I think I got it now. They exemplified what really made this the greatest country on God's green earth. That willingness to work hard, make something a little bit better, and pass it on to that next generation better than they had it. That self-sufficiency and that drive, that internal entrepreneurial clock that seemed to exist so prevalently. I know it's still out there, but I don't know that it's out there to the degree that historically it was in this country.
No, I would agree with you. I'm probably about 18 years younger than you. I'm 55. I really am not afraid of down times because I know how to butcher a beef. I know how to grow a garden that can sustain my family. I know how to, wire my house with a generator if there's no power. I mean, I know those things just because we had to do it. And so I'm not afraid of those types of things, but I fear for my kids because unfortunately I didn't have the playground of the family ranch to show them all those skills. And so by omission, they don't have those skills, and it's a little alarming. But Again, we are thankful for the times we're in. But okay, so now I want to pivot a little bit, and I want to talk about your venture. We haven't really talked about it that much. You're in the bison business. You're raising buffalo. All right. So what was the crazy thought to go back to dealing with livestock, and especially livestock that are nowhere near tame?
No, they're not. Well, this started very shortly after we had decided to annex the farm property, sell the cows, change careers. So I'm at the bank, and we're developing the old farm, building houses. And Claudia and I both, we just last year celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary. So I'm hoping that God gives us as many years as He gave my parents together. But we were talking then that sometime, if we ever get to the point in life again where we've got the opportunity, we'd like to get some land, get back on some land. And what would you do with that? Claudia said, well, even before we sold the cows in 1990, I had become fascinated with buffalo. There was a gentleman, I don't know, 8-10 miles north of us that had a few of them running out in his pasture. And every time I'd drive by, I'd almost break my neck looking at those buffalo and thinking, isn't that just the coolest animal that you've ever seen? And I wonder what it's like to raise them.
Right.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that opportunity, that time for us actually came in 2007. I had run for governor, wasn't quite successful. And so I got a little downtime. Claudia had just sold the bank and was no longer chairman of the board and helping operate that on a daily basis. I'm out of Congress, obviously. And we went to a friend's wedding down in South Park, a young lady that had worked for me. And we drove by some ranches that had a real estate sign up. And Claudia said, you remember when we talked about it? And that's how it started.
Wow.
Pretty quickly, we found ourselves, looking at this place and looking at that place. But I had in my head that I wanted a real working ranch. And
right.
For me, that meant it had to have water on it, that you could grow some good hay, that you could raise some livestock. And I still had in the back of my mind that someday I'd love to try to raise buffalo. I knew I could raise cattle. We had raised a lot of them.
Yeah.
lots of other animals too, but I didn't know what it was like to raise buffalo. So I had just about given up. Most of the ranches we had looked at had sold their water off. We looked a lot of them in South Park, on the eastern, the Elbert County down around Elizabeth, Douglas County, that way. And I just wasn't finding what worked. And finally, she found this place online for sale by owner, a Civil War vet.
Oh my goodness!
Civil War veteran came out here, and in 1882, homesteaded that place under the Homestead Act. He had stuck his flag in one piece of ground, his brother on the other side. They were Connecticut, natives of Connecticut, fought in the Civil War, came out here and started the ranch. His grandson was in his 70s and was still ranching it. So it'd been the same family for those 3 generations. And finally, their kids had moved away and he had to face the music. And so they put it up for sale. We looked at it on September 4th, and by September 20th, we had a contract on it.
Fantastic.
I just fell in love with it. And I tell people it may not be heaven, but I can see it from there. It's up in North Park.
Okay.
It's not very far from Walden, or directly over the top of the Continental Divide from east of Steamboat Springs.
Yep.
Is where we're at.
Just a little bit north of Kremling then?
Yeah, north of Kremling, about an hour north of Kremling. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's beautiful country up there.
I love it. And it's still, you feel like you're back 100 years ago because it's still very sparsely populated.
Yep.
Very, very rural, very ranchy. That's pretty much what happens up there.
And I'll bet you when you pass somebody head on in traffic, they'll wave at you, right?
Oh, absolutely. and Rex, you talk about old habits. People, neighbors, and neighbors up there are 5-10 miles away.
Sure.
Neighbors will stop in and, not because they need something or want something, just to make sure you're okay and see how you're doing. Exactly. And, very old-fashioned neighbor-to-neighbor hospitality.
Yeah, I can remember as a kid because, the Sand Hills in Nebraska, same type of area out there, wide open, miles and miles between the next neighbor. And you drive down the highway and people were waving at you. Well, I was a city kid from Golden. And I asked my dad, why are they waving at you? Or there's something, man. He goes, no, they haven't seen anybody in a week. And that's just their hospitality. And then everybody knew my grandfather because he was a very successful rancher in that area. And he ran the sale barn in Valentine, so the cattle sale barn. And I got some funny stories about cleaning out dip tanks and stuff like that. But the biggest thing was he gave me one of his pickups. Well, actually, I bought a pickup from him. And I was driving it in Valentine. And I had people darn near stop me, or when I stopped, asked me who I was because who's driving Leo's pickup.
Oh, yeah.
So it was, but absolutely. And to this day, you go up there and you're in the Sand Hills, and unless you're some complete stranger, boy, they're still waving off the steering wheel at you. So that's great. All right. So you got your ground, you got it under contract in there. What did you have to do to get prepped to run buffalo?
Well, I'd already mentioned that the guy that was still ranching it was in his 70s, and for about 15 years he hadn't run any cattle himself on the place.
Oh my!
The irrigation ditches had deteriorated some. He was making what hay he could in the summer, and he and his wife were doing all the work just themselves, so they were kind of getting by.
Okay.
But we had a lot of work to do. We tore down 17 miles of fence and put up new fence. Had to build all the working pens around the barn where we gather the buffalo in the fall for the roundup. We had to build all that because what little was there was not going to hold buffalo.
Now, we're not talking 3-wire post fence type, barbed wire type fence. You had to put up some serious fence, didn't you?
Well, for out in the meadows, we actually use a 4-wire.
Okay.
Barbed wire fence, but the top wire is hot.
Okay.
So we used electricity. And that helped.
Yeah.
The buffalo still, if they want to go through a fence, they're going to go through a fence.
Yeah. If they want to, they're gone. Yeah. That's
then the gathering pens again, we call them the working pens in and around the barn.
Yep.
Those are all well, at least 6 feet. Some of them are a little higher than that. And they're all steel rod. The sucker rod that comes out of the oil wells, you're probably familiar with that.
Yep.
Use a 2.5-inch post, steel post, cemented in the ground, and then that sucker rod about every 10 inches from ground up to 6.5, 7 feet high. Some of the fences are even solid sheeted. We'll take that sucker rod, that steel fence, and put 4x8 steel sheeting up so the buffalo can't see through it.
Well, that's not working pens for cattle. I mean, that's a lot different type of configuration.
Very, very different. And yeah, they're, as I said, I raised a lot of cattle, and, you want to move some cattle, you get behind them, and off they go. And if one turns around and comes back at you, you can change their mind. You're not going to do that with buffalo. We learned that pretty quickly and learned it the hard way. They decide where they're going to go and when they're going to go and what the rules are. You just have to be patient and wait them out.
Okay.
We're much, when we do have to move them, and you do, we usually bait them with feed. We'll dribble some feed out and let them follow the trail. And like gathering them in the fall, instead of getting out there and with horses and a bunch of people and chasing them in, because they'll sooner or later they'll just turn around and break and they're gone, and then you'll never get them back.
Yeah, no, I hadn't even stopped to think about that, because one of the chores that we had to go do was to go bring the cattle in from different fields to put them into different fields, and so we'd move them. Well, yeah, my brother and I are in a pickup or a horse with with our dog. We would just go get them. And literally it would be 12-year-olds going and doing that. You could move cattle. Yep. It doesn't sound like you can do that with a buffalo.
No. So what we do gradually is just start feeding closer and closer and closer to the barn.
Yeah.
And then the day before, the veterinarian's going to come and do the vet check and the vaccinations and all that. The weed. Right. We'll actually feed them in those pens. My son will go out by himself, not a big group of people, because the more people, the more they get alarmed.
Yep.
He'll go out, drop the hay for him. As he's driving out of the pen, he'll shut the gate, and we got them.
Wow, that's great.
They're in jail, but it's just a magnificent creature. So we were talking about self-sufficiency earlier.
Right.
Until we showed up, man showed up in the 1800s out here in the West, that they didn't really have much of a predator. Wolves certainly took down some, bears, maybe mountain lions, but the buffalo pretty much had it their way.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to mess with a buffalo.
No.
They'll win just about every fight.
Now, how big is a male? What's a bull weigh?
Bulls will get upwards of 2,000 pounds, 2,500 is a big bull.
Big bull.
Cows are more. Well, our cow herd averages about 1,150 pounds. We'll have some 1,300 pound cows. We'll have some closer to 1,000, the younger ones.
Okay.
But, not completely dissimilar. In fact, quite similar to cattle.
Right.
And of course, the carcass looks a lot the same. Buffalo have more meat in the front quarters and not so much in the back.
Okay.
But the cuts are the same. You get all the same steaks and roasts and ground. And
so is your total poundage yield percentage about the same?
Very similar.
Okay.
Very similar. You'll get a buffalo carcass that'll dress out about 60%.
That's great.
Yeah, and we're doing all grass finished. I don't have a lot of buffalo are finished in feedlots just like cattle are now, and I don't have a big problem with that. But in our situation, and for our management style, doing it just like Mother Nature did it.
Right.
That single ingredient diet, that wonderful grass, they do just fine. And then we market not all of our animals, 'cause we don't have enough space to finish all of them every year, but we'll
Right.
finish about 45 or 50 a year and slaughter them. And my wife again, Claudia, she does all the retailing of the meat. So we've shipped our meat from Hawaii to Connecticut, Florida to Alaska.
Wow, that's
And
fantastic.
we had having fun doing that too.
Now, your bison meat's leaner, right? For those who
Oh,
may
yeah.
not be familiar.
Yeah, it's very lean. In fact, leaner even than like turkey.
Wow.
That's very lean, and that's one thing you need to be aware of. If you like your steak well done, you're probably not going to like a bison steak. If you like it to the medium rare or rare side, you're going to love it.
Yeah.
As lean as it is, if you overcook it, it's going to get pretty dry.
Good try.
But it's a wonderful meat. As you can imagine, I ate a lot of beef. We always had our own meat and had plenty of it. I still love a good beefsteak, but a friend of mine that helped mentor us when we got in the buffalo business, he had converted to buffalo, and when I was first asking him some questions about maybe raising them, he said, "Have you eaten much buffalo?" And I said, "No, a lot of beef. Occasionally a buffalo hamburger, maybe a steak or two." He said, "Well, I'm going to make you a bet that once you do, you prefer it." He was right. I really enjoy the buffalo, and it is very healthy. We actually have customers come to us and say, "My doctor says it's the only red meat I can have because I got a heart problem or a cholesterol problem." It's very lean, very low in cholesterol, very high in protein, and the demand is just incredible.
So before we go to the next question here, just so because I have terrible keeping thoughts sometimes, what's your website for your meat company?
Oh, thank you for asking, for allowing me to mention it.
No, that's what we do.
We call the ranch Eagles Wing, and the website is Eagles, plural, Eagles with an S, eagleswingnaturalbison.com.
Fantastic.
eagleswingnaturalbison.com.
Well, we'll certainly post that out. Yeah, we always like to share that. So what's been the biggest challenge? I mean, obviously this is a different type of animal. It's much more wild and unmanageable. What's been the biggest challenge as you've been, going through being a bison rancher now?
Well, you obviously have had some ranch experience as well, or experience around cattle, and you mentioned even dairy cattle.
Yep.
Let me talk about the dairy cattle for just a moment more. We managed them so intensely. We were concerned about where they laid down, that they had a dry, clean place to lay. We built these barns for them with stalls that they could go in and lie down in, keep them very clean, very comfortable. If you saw one with a little bit of a runny nose, you had them sure that they were healthy again. And then, of course, the milking of them, we actually, not just twice a day, we started milking 3 times a day because there was actually less stress on the cow.
Yep.
More frequently, less stress on their udder.
Yep.
And we actually got a little bit more production as well. So they were healthier and we were happier. But you just, from birth on, you just babied them and cared for everything about them. You practically hand feed them.
Yeah.
The buffalo are very different. They're very self-sufficient. And one of the things I had to learn was, as I mentioned earlier, about being patient around them and letting them kind of make the decision, okay, it's time to move and we're going to move in that direction. The best advice we ever got, and I think it sums up, and it's the answer to your question, you have to realize that for thousands of years, they got along just fine with no one.
Yep.
The cattle wouldn't be able to do that. Horses, any other domestic livestock is not going to survive, certainly not thrive, without us humans taking care of them. Buffalo are just the other way around. They figured it out just fine on their own. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
When we showed up, we almost drove them into extinction in a matter of a few years. It's really a sad story. So the motto that we heard and have kind of learned to live by is, well, two sentences. What happens out there where you've got the buffalo, what happens out there happens. If the one has a problem calving, unfortunately, she probably doesn't survive. You're not going to cut her away from the herd. You're not going to get up and to her and try to help her deliver that calf. It's just not going to happen. So what happens out there happens, and sometimes bad stuff happens. Some don't survive.
Yeah.
And the other motto was, you have to remember to let buffalo be buffalo.
Right.
They figure out what's best for them to eat. They figure out where best to find it. If you don't open a gate and let them go to a new pasture, they're going to open the fence and go to that new pasture. Time to go. And that herding of them, you have to, you know who Temple Grandin is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant lady up at Colorado State University.
Yep.
I mean, she is one of the most insightful people, especially for managing buffalo. She did a lot with sheep and with cattle and horses and all kinds of livestock. But she's also been a mentor to the buffalo industry and tried to get us humans to think like a buffalo, see what the buffalo sees, and try to, what would the buffalo want to do next?
Right.
So we build our facilities with the advice and the insight of what Dr. Grandin has taught us. And they get along better and we get along better. But again, the key word I think is let buffalo be buffalo. That was the biggest lesson I had to learn, because I was always one who thought, well, I manage them.
Right.
Buffalo pretty much manage us.
You know, that's pretty much a life lesson that you could translate to a lot of things that are going on these days. You know, I've raised 5 kids. Just about finished with that. My youngest is 18 and almost out the door. And I had a son who they nicknamed him as a character trait as resolute. And you could tell him 100 things to do, but he would just do what he wanted to do. And I remember one day, finally, after lots of coaxing and other stuff, that he was going to go head off to college. And I said, well, I'm glad you're doing this. He said, Dad, sometimes you just have to do things on your own. And so I think the buffalo pretty much might be like my son, a little resolute. So that's fascinating. So is there anything unexpected that you learned, you know, like just little crazy things? I was going to ask also, too, throw this out there. When it comes for slaughter and processing, is there a company that you're using here in Colorado that's doing that for you, or what's that look like?
Yeah, there is. I'll mention 2.
Okay.
If you've been in a number of grocery stores, I'm not sure how many they're in right now, but Rocky Mountain Natural Meats markets a lot of buffalo, and you've probably seen their product in some grocery stores, seen their label. A gentleman named Bob Deneen, I mentioned early on my first inspiration to raise buffalo. There was a place just north of our dairy. Bob was actually the foreman on that place back in that day. I didn't know him.
Wow.
And got to know him years later, but he was the foreman there, looked after that herd for that gentleman who was an absentee owner. And then years later, after that guy sold his buffalo and moved on, actually passed away, Bob needed to do something. He said he couldn't afford to buy his own ranch, and he started processing buffalo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and kind of made a market for the few buffalo ranchers that were around here, and that has grown. He now has a plant where they're slaughtering over 400 head a day. Ooh. All of Ted Turner's buffalo come down here.
Okay.
Out at Brush, way out on the Eastern Plains.
Yep.
Bought it what was a hog slaughter facility that closed and converted it to manage both cattle as well as buffalo. And wow. They're doing a large volume. So Rocky Mountain Natural Meats, they call that the slaughter place, the processing places, Brush Meat Processors.
Okay.
And the label they put on the buffalo is Rocky Mountain Natural Meats. The other place, and the one we use, much more smaller facility, family owned, Double J Meat Packing at the little town of Pierce. Most people have no idea where Pierce even is. It's north of Greeley.
Yep.
I don't know, 8 or 10 miles, if that.
Yep.
Greeley, Alt, Pierce.
Pierce. Yep. Exactly.
Right up 85. And they did just a terrific job. That's where Bob Dineen, who I mentioned a moment ago, that's where he first got the few buffalo slaughtered. Then he'd take the carcasses down to Commerce City to a warehouse that they had bought, a refrigerated warehouse.
Yep.
And they'd cut it all into the steaks and
Yep.
make the ground and the roasts and package it and so forth. So Double J built facilities back when Bob was kind of their customer. They built facilities to handle buffalo. You don't stick them in just a normal set of fences.
No.
That. So they built facilities and had a crew that were familiar with the nuances of the idiosyncrasies of buffalo versus cattle.
Right.
They still process a lot of buffalo, and they do all of ours. Put it in our packages, our labels, vacuum sealed packages. They're a USDA inspected plant, which we kind of were insistent upon for our customers' sake and ours as well.
Yep.
So doing a first-rate job, and we're grateful to have them. If they weren't there, frankly, I don't know what we would do.
And I'm assuming you're able to transport them in a standard stock, trailer.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a challenge. Occasionally, you'll find
get them in there.
A little poke in the steel on the side of your trailer from the horn of the buffalo. So they're it's always a pretty good rodeo when you're working the buffalo and moving them around.
Yeah, I at my grandfather's stockyards there, we used to help them get the cattle out of the trucks, and then they'd run them down the chute and they drop into a dip tank.
Yeah, oh yeah, I've done that with cattle.
Yep, because we're right there by the South Dakota state line. So, guess who got to clean out the dip tank? Oh boy!
Congratulations, right?
Yeah, you haven't lived until you did. My kids look at me like I got two heads when I tell that story. Or the other one is my grandfather got this ingenious thing for us kids to make some more money. We take the pressure washers and he'd offer it as a service to the cattle haulers to wash out the trailers.
Yeah.
Well, you got to start at the top, right? Well, do you think that stuff just doesn't come down? So you wash it out, and then the rest of the time, it's raining on you, and that rain is not clear. I'll just say that.
No. It's got a little tint to it.
Oh, it's got a tint and a smell, and you go home like, oh boy.
There's not many people that could say they've done both cleaning out stock trailers as well as dip tanks.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you, I'm a unique guy. Build websites, clean out dip tanks. It's a crazy world out there. So it's been fascinating. What would your advice be to someone who's interested in that business? Hint, hint, yada, yada.
Do exactly as we did. The first thing I did when we got this ranch under contract in the fall of 2007, I thought, well, if I'm going to put buffalo on it, I ought to learn something about the business. And it was fall. Actually, this January, stock show is happening. Yep. I knew, having been down there before, that they actually did have some buffalo down there.
Okay.
So I looked at their schedule and thought, I'll just go down and walk around and, I don't know, just see what I can learn. The first guy that I walked into, I didn't recognize him. He recognized me. I'd been in all that politics stuff.
Yeah.
And I walked in, and Bob Dineen, same guy again.
Same guy.
I crawled over the top of the fence down at the stockyards and barely got my feet on the ground. And this guy looks at me. He says, "Bob Beauprez?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Bob Dineen." So I told him why I was there, and he said, "You need to meet," and introduced me to two of the ranchers, one up by the Wyoming line. Well, actually, both of them near the Wyoming line, one close to Laramie, one close to Cheyenne. And he said, "Go visit with them." So I visited both of their ranches, got great advice from them. You know, I figured, well, we'll go buy some cows, some pregnant cows, so we get some calves right away. And boy, that was one of the biggest mistakes we could have made had we done it.
How's that?
Well, as these guys told me, they said, you buy some older cows and they're going to go back home. He said, I don't care what kind of fence you build, they're going to go back home.
Yeah.
And they said, get some young calves, yearlings, start them in small pens, feed them there, let them get comfortable, settle down there for several weeks, then turn them out in a small pasture, right? Maybe hopefully next door to that small pen they were in. And they use the word condition them to your place, your management, your feed. Let them know that all is well here and this is home.
Right.
And go from there. That's exactly what we did. And we got along fine. We got one of the things, the nice things, you and I have both been in a number of different businesses, some fairly competitive ones.
Yep.
Banking's pretty competitive. Politics is certainly competitive.
Yep.
The buffalo business and the cattle business was quite competitive. The thing about the buffalo business is it's so small, so collegial, so fraternal, that the few of us that are in it typically share their secrets, both the good things that they've learned, the bad things, the mistakes they've made. And these two gentlemen and Bob Deneen were just invaluable to us in getting started. We bought our seed stock from both of them, learned a lot about fencing, learned a lot about management technique, learned a lot about the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots with buffalo. And so that, if somebody's even thinking about it, go visit someplace. We've had a couple of people that did end up getting in the business that help volunteer, help us out with our roundup, just to be around them and experience what it's like to work buffalo. It's very, very different than cattle.
Now there's a national association, isn't there, for buffalo raisers?
And as luck would have it, it's right here in Denver, the National Bison Association.
Okay.
They've got a website as well. I think it's bisoncentral.com or .org.
Okay.
Bisoncentral.com, maybe it's .org. But it's right here in Denver.
Well, that's great to know. Great local resource. Well, Bob, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed our time this morning, getting to know you a little better. You know, the first time I ever bumped into you was literally back when you were running for Congress, and it was out the Colorado School of Mines at a primary or a caucus event forever ago. And so you were just somebody that stood out. And I'm like, well, I got to see if I can. I walked up to you, and I know you would never remember because you shake a million people's hands over your political career. But I just said, this is a guy I'm going to follow. So it's been a really enjoyable time this morning to learn more about a lifestyle that is slowly fading into the sunset, unfortunately. The fascinating business about being buffalo. And I'm going to have you back because I purposely didn't want to talk politics today because there's too many of those podcasts out there. But I do want to come back in the future here and have you talk about, what things look like from your lenses today.
I'd be happy to do that with you.
Right? It's a great thing. So one more time, if you could, just so people can find your meat company, go ahead and give your website address for the Eagle's Wing, and let's make sure everybody knows how to get a hold of you.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity, Rex. Eagle's Wing, Eagles plural with an S, Eagles Wing Natural Bison.com.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks, Bob. We appreciate your time today. And until next time, everyone, tune back in for the next engaging story and a little bit of fun and maybe some education. Thanks from the Rex Allen Show.